Hey y'all, today is the day that I get into the wet media on this piece. I've actually, obviously, like I did the block in and tonal underpainting in the previous video. Let that sit for several days. I came back and did a color wash on top of it, which is not a very complicated or time-consuming process, but it really helps set me up for what I'm going to do today, which is just get in and start executing, going for final strokes. Sometimes I do it in one pass. Sometimes I come back and give it a second pass. So my aim today is to take it to completion, but I can't know how the day is going to go, so we'll see what happens next. Normally I have a lot of anxiety at this stage just because this is full commitment time. And I really always feel, even with all the decisions that have brought me here and everything that has been narrowed and narrowed and narrowed to bring this painting in the direction it's going, the day that you sit down to work really does make a difference. And the paintings that I've finished, I always feel like if I had sat down with it the day before or the day after, it would be in some way or another a different painting. And sometimes you got to just get in the chair and do it. And sometimes you have the luxury of maybe waiting a day or two if you know you're not like in the right headspace or there's going to be too many distractions. I've got today just blocked out, no distractions, nothing to really disrupt me. And yesterday was intended to be that day for me, but I was feeling a little under the weather. And so I decided to swap them around. And so going to get into it, pretty excited about where it's going. I always start with the most critical parts of the picture and work my way out from there. For me, that helps me kind of set a baseline and really establish. It helps me know the parameters of the piece. And when I start with something that is more detailed and more critical, then I know how much I can suggest in the areas that are less critical, as opposed to feeling like I need to really over detail things, which I try to avoid doing. And it also gives me a lot of confidence going forward. When I sit down and in the first couple hours, I establish a really key part of the painting to a level that I'm very happy with, then from there, the rest of the day just feels like it's just going to flow. And so that's what I'm hoping is going to happen today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of brought me around to creating this piece. I talked about that in the first part of this video, but there's some other aspects to it as well. And it started when I was getting ready for my DragonCon prep, and I started looking through all of the different images that I have available to make prints of. What did I want to prepare to bring with me to this particular show? Going through it was an interesting experience because it made me realize that a lot of the work I've done for projects where I was really solving the need of that project didn't necessarily align with something that works well as a print that a person might choose to hang up on their wall. And that struck me just as an interesting idea, because you'd think that a successful painting is a successful painting either way. And of course, like any visual art, somebody's probably going to appreciate it and want to hang it up and see it every day. But certain pieces just have an energy, a feel, something about them, a decorative quality or an emotional impact, something that makes a person more attracted to that as wall art, as opposed to a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few years, which is interior illustrations for illustrated books. I've gotten a lot of illustrated book projects over the last few years, and those tend to be pieces that are just have a different vibe about them. some of them would make a great print, and most of the time cover pieces make good prints. I don't know, it was just like something interesting, and it got me thinking about, there was a period when I was starting out in illustration that I kind of thought, like, if you can do illustrations for one client, any other client would be able to look at that and see that you could do work for them too. And I realized, as I started to get more experience and started working with more different types of clients, that there's definitely a difference between, say, a magic card and a book cover. And when you're doing one thing, you might be perfectly capable of doing the other, but somebody who, let's say an art director who works for a publisher and looks at your magic cards, they might say, this guy can paint, but I don't know if they can paint that for what we need, and vice versa. And, just to kind of be a little bit more specific, when you're doing a magic card, you're going to be producing an image that there are certain problems that need to be solved, certain needs need to be met. The kind of key things are, it needs to hit a very specific story beat, or in the case of creature cards, sometimes it's not as narrative and it's more of like a portrait type of piece. And it needs to reproduce well at a very small size, and it needs to be legible from, let's say, 5 feet away, upside down, when your opponent plays the card on the table. It needs to be very recognizable so that you can see the picture and know what the card is. And that's a set of very specific needs, in addition to just a general quality standard. And when you're doing a book cover, at least back when I started my career and people were still buying books in stores, and there were, I think, more painted covers on genre novels than there are maybe today, book covers needed to grab attention and stand out. So there's still that need to have clarity at a small size. There was competition for attention amongst book covers on a shelf that magic cards don't necessarily have. It's a different problem to solve. And that, when you're solving that problem, those pieces also tend to be pieces that are going to be more like something that is going to work well as a print or a poster or something like that, because the whole purpose of it is to be really immediately compelling and dynamic. And again, like, take that even further, and then you're getting into like comic book covers, where comic book covers on the surface seem very similar to a book cover, but it's taken kind of even further. And there's more stylization, more kinetic energy to it, whereas book covers oftentimes might be able to be quieter than you would see on comic books. It's really, there's always exceptions. These aren't hard and fast rules or anything, but these are just general observations that I had. So I've been doing a lot of illustrated novels in the past few years. I think the first one I did was in 2012, Anubis Gates with Centipede Press, a book by Tim Powers. And I was really excited when I got to do that, because I had always loved this expression of illustration, this avenue of illustration. Ever since I was probably a student at art school, and I went to the Brandywine Museum, which at that time had this display of N.C. Wyeth Treasure Island paintings from N.C. Wyeth's Illustrated Treasure Island. They didn't have the entire collection of paintings, but they had at least 14 or 15 of them, in a room just laid out on the wall, one after the next, 30 by 40 inch, nice big paintings. And it was really such an experience to just walk through the room and see these paintings and feel the story unfold. And I just loved that. It really captivated me. And it really set in my mind what makes a good illustrated book. And it's about how these images individually, they are little pieces of something much bigger. And sometimes they're quiet and sometimes they're more bold, but they all serve the purpose of being true to the subject and the story. And whereas a cover needs to grab that attention. And it maybe doesn't matter if the cover is a little inaccurate in some ways. There's a lot of covers in the history of book cover art that depict a character or a scene or something that is specifically described in the story in a way that you would say is wrong. Somebody who already knows the story would look at it and say, that's not how that's described. But it's not really going to matter if the whole purpose of that image is to sell the book. You just want to grab people's attention and compel them to pick up the book and decide to buy it. When you're selling images for, when you're creating images for an illustrated novel or these more specialty presses, you're selling books to people who already know the story and love it. And so it's much more important that the piece is true to the subject and that it has to have that literal and emotional accuracy. And so that's like way high up on the priorities. And it's way high up on the priorities that these pieces, of course, are of high quality and that they select and represent important moments in the story. But it's not high up on that list that they grab attention or that they look good on a wall. You're seeing it in such a different context. You're seeing it in a much slower pace where you're reading the book or you're looking through the images and it doesn't have that competitive atmosphere of trying to grab your attention from a bookshelf or when you're scrolling online and looking at little thumbnails or something like that. It doesn't have the need to read clearly from across a table really small or something like that. You know, it's got different needs. And I think that when I look at all the different types of illustrations that I've done, I can recognize that the needs of one piece might not be high up on the list of another piece, but there's probably general overlap in all of them. They all need these things in different ratios, but maybe that bold impact or the thing that makes a piece look great as a standalone image on a wall, which is really important for a book cover or a poster image that I'm doing for a sideshow. So the most important thing for a project like that, it's of low importance when I'm doing interior artwork for a book where it's a different kind of context that people are experiencing that image in. But it caused me to think about how just because it's lower on the list doesn't mean it should be discarded entirely. And so it's something that I want to think about more in the pieces that I make going forward, that regardless of, like, I still feel the need to address the problems of the particular project first and foremost, but to not lose sight of those other things and to really sit down and think about all the different things that are important to these different types of projects and make sure that there is still attention given, even if some things are of lower importance with one particular painting, that it's still something to consider and not just get to a point in developing the concept where I don't need to think further because I've crossed off X, Y, and Z from the list of things I need to do, and I don't need to think about it further than that. It's just another thing to keep in mind to, I guess, kind of like continue. We always have to push ourselves and remind ourselves to think a little longer and work a little deeper on the work that we're creating. And so this piece was really kind of a response to that, because I realized in looking through my work, especially so much of my work from the past 5 or 6 years is either tied up in IPs that I don't have the rights to make prints of, or it's interiors for books that don't necessarily make as compelling of a print or a playmat or something like that. Some of them just happen to, but it was never really the job of those paintings to do that thing. And so I wanted to do a piece, just sit down and think about a piece that really could work in that respect. And that's what brought me to this one. So thank you for watching and thank you for listening. The folks who support me on Patreon, thank you for your support. And I will catch you all next time.